Good evening, Liliana, Sarah, Tiffany, and Sandra. How are you? Do you hear me? Do you guys hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, teacher, in this moment, yes.
Okay, Liliana, thank you.
Yes, teacher.
Okay. Good. All right, Sandra, I know you also leave and counter in 30 minutes. So let's start. Last time I had problems with my connection, and we need the last part of the.
Teacher, good.
I'm going to repeat. Sarah?
Teacher, I can hear you.
Okay. Last time I had problems with my connection last week, and we missed the last part of the presentation and the topic that we discussed. So we are going to start with that topic, which is the research article that you read about an after-school program in a place in Southern California. That program was for students who live in the area, which is very close to Mexico. That after-school program was designed for students to work on bilingualism and bicultural education. So they had, you remember, it was about a computer program that students use in order to practice either Spanish or English, and also a tutoring that they had with the parents to work on their homework. So,
good evening, teacher. Sorry for interrupting. Is that your audio is intermittent?
Okay, thanks for letting me know. Rafael, what did you understand? I'm going to repeat, okay? So I was telling you that last time we couldn't discuss about the research article related with a school in Southern California and a program designed for students that lived close to Mexico, but also some of them lived in California. So we're going to start with that information. I want any of you tell me what you remember about the ideology that the after-school program had regarding language, the use of language. Do you remember it was a research about an after-school program for primary school students? Sarah, do you remember about it?
Yes, teacher. I remember a specific or a special moment when one teacher asked to the students about the colors. And two students answered in Spanish, and the only one to answer in English because his mother told him that he always had to speak in English in each class. So I remember this because I think that in this school on MCM, the is to mix or to relationship with the Spanish and English. It's not a specific rule to speak in only language. Students can communicate with English or Spanish. So I think that the dominant language in that country is English, and I think that maybe in this case I am sorry, I agreed with one of the teachers, which say that English is important, but in this case, when the students sharing the two different language, they are learning, but it's not an good process, it's a good learning process. I think that maybe in the United States, Latin families have a rule at home. Spanish is spoken inside at home and English is spoken outside. So probably this is the case of the student who's a student, his mother said him that he had to speak in English all the time in the classes. I don't know if you remember that. So the interruption, unfortunately, this interruption lost the socialization of both language and produced difficulties to achieve the expectations in this institution or this MCM. That is my magical class, my magical class.
Right, Sarah. So students interacted with different people at school, and those people had different ideologies regarding language. As you mentioned, one teacher thought that it was not good to use Spanish at school because it was better to use only English, since she considered that English was the language of opportunities and it was better to master it and forget about Spanish. As you mentioned, also some students dealt with the idea of speaking only English at school because their parents had that ideology. And others, others didn't have any restriction. Other students didn't have any restriction regarding the use of Spanish at school. So it was difficult for the program that was promoting bilingualism and bicultural um, ideologies, because some people that participated in the program had different ideologies too. I would also like any of you tell about the policies that California school have about language, and if you remember what was the tutors' ideologies about language. Students interacted with some undergraduate tutors that helped during the after school program. So what were their ideologies regarding language?
I think that the main
The question, I didn't listen.
Okay, there are two questions. One, what is the undergraduate tutors' ideologies about language? And the second one is what is the policy at Californian schools regarding language, foreign languages?
Well, in my case, I remember that the Californian school doesn't impose any language and try to that the learning process of the English was was completely, but the main police doesn't impose any language, and the children are living have to the option to choose what is the what was the favorite language to talk in that class.
In the program. But for Californian schools, the policy is different regarding learning a foreign language.
Sorry, yes. In the main is English because in that country it's necessary to get jobs or another opportunities in the life. So English is the dominant language. So teachers, tutors, and undergrads think that the English is most important than the Spanish. But there are I don't know, contradiction or
yes,
because in that country, in California, there are many people who are Latin. So those people have a knowledge about own language in Spanish and English, but it's not enough about two languages or about both languages. It's an intermediate knowledge.
okay. So as you mentioned, they go for monolingual. Yes, you answered one question.
My idea.
I got your idea, Sarah. You mentioned that Californian schools or Californian policies for schools is to promote monolingual education because they see it as important to strengthen the power that English has in the country and in the world. So they go for a monolingual approach. However, this school has this after-school program, but it was not working as they planned that it should work. Okay, who else remembers about the undergraduate tutors ideologies regarding language? Remember that there were some university students who helped. Okay, I'm back. The connection was working well yesterday. I'm sorry again. Okay, I ask you if any of you remember the undergraduate language ideologies. The after-school program at that school in Southern California had some university students that were Americans and helped or tutor those primary school students when they were working in the computer program. Do you remember what were the ideologies of those undergraduate tutors regarding language?
I remember another pedagogy of thought, I think.
Okay.
Other,
Well, those undergraduate students spoke English, only English to those students. And those undergraduate students felt kind of confused when they heard students speaking in Spanish because they thought they had to practice their English. So that was also a reason why the program, the after school program, was not working as it was planned. The idea when I decided to have you read those or that article was to let you know one way to put in practice the knowledge that you have been acquiring regarding social linguistics. We have read about ideologies, about power, about varieties, etc. And so this is one way to apply that knowledge through research, finding out what is going on in bilingual schools. To find out what goes on in bilingual schools regarding the ideologies that people have. I'm sorry for the connection. It is again working badly. It worked yesterday, worked well, so I thought the problem was solved, but I don't know what's going on today. Okay, so the topic of the research in that school was the information that was missing in the last encounter. Now we're going to discuss the readings that you had last week, which was the last chapter for the book, the last chapter that you had to read this semester for the book of social linguistics. This week you are reading about neuroeducation because Applied Linguistics 2 is a course that is divided into two main subjects or fields of linguistics, which is social linguistics and neurolinguistics or neuroscience of education. So that's why you are reading this week something different, which is about neuroeducation. The file that I published in the virtual room about neuroeducation needs to be turned. So you just have to go to the link that says that Adobe has on the top and find out the option that says move it to the right, move it 90 degrees. Do you guys have questions about that information that I published in the virtual room?
Teacher, only in the question C, what does the term brain plasticity refer to is, well, we have to explain the others windows of
Plasticity.
Plasticity?
Yes, you need to explain that concept as it is explained in the articles that you are reading about neuroeducation.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to move to the readings that you had last week, which were about multilingual societies and multilingual discourse. Okay, in those readings, there was an explanation about the concept of multilingualism. What is it? Does anybody remember what it is about?
Yes, teacher.
Noemi, go ahead.
Yes, they explained that multilingualism is common in societies across the world, and in many cases of groups when the people speak different languages, but they live near another countries, for example, in the borders or in the neighboring nations. For me, I have the experience living in UAE, where it's people coming from everywhere of the world. So you can see in one table they are speaking Japanese, in another table they are speaking French, in another table they are speaking Tagalog from Filipinas, or they are speaking Spanish. And just when they interact with another person of out of the group, they speak in English, and for sure they miss as us English with the with their with the mother language. So I think this is the part of the multilingualism that is very important. No, like is the part that is like a social identity where you live.
Okay, and have you ever experienced code switching when
Yes,
you
for
are?
sure. For sure, because for example, I am speaking with my partner in Spanish, but suddenly one guest is coming, or one friend from another country is coming to speak with us. So automatically we need to start to speak in English because we want him to get part into the group. So just it's not because okay about switch code. I want to say something. It happens when you don't have the capacity of speech entirely the another language. But in this case, it's not because of that. It's because you want to make another person make a part of your group.
Right, so that is one type of code switching. The other one is what you mentioned when we forget words, in our case in English, and we are speaking with a Spanish speaker. We sometimes code switch to Spanish because we don't find out the word in English to say what we want. But in the other case, as you mentioned, we code switch when there is, in your case, a third person who is going to interact with you and your other and the other speaker, and the common language among the three of you is in this case English. So you
Yes,
change.
it's very interesting. And also the another option is when you make the switch code, not just because you don't remember the word, just because it's more short or more easy to say.
For example,
I don't remember now, but in many cases I start to speak English, just a few words, because they are shorter than in Spanish. I will
okay,
think about it and I will write you the example, okay?
okay, thank you, Noemi.
Okay,
Who
thank you.
remembers the research about code switching in a group of university students, the research that you read about it? Who remembers the purpose of code switching in that context? Remember last week you had a research about the use of L1 as a cognitive tool. It was a study carried out in a group of university students. The
Good evening,
idea,
teacher.
hello, Giancarlo.
Yes, I think I do. I remember the reasons of the research. There were basically two. One was for tax management. The students would need the language in order to better understand the purpose of the tags or the different roles they had to play and the functions they had to play and things they had to do. So they would switch back to L1 in order to clarify that, or to give directions as they were working as a cooperative team. And the second reason was in order to clarify meaning. It is cases where they needed to explain or get the rules behind grammar and vocabulary. So they would switch back to Spanish in order to clarify that. So, and as soon as they did that, they would return to English, I mean, to the target language. So those were one of the two reasons that I can tell, like,
Okay.
for me, the most important for them to do that.
Yes, that was mentioned there. Do you remember the level of those students? The English level?
Well, yeah, I do. There were, I think there were several levels because the research was conducted for. I'm sorry, I'm kind of running right now.
Okay. Who remembers the level of those students? Who remembers the reason why they, sorry, the level those students have? Well, they were beginners, and since they didn't have a lot of vocabulary, they use Spanish or their L1 to communicate and to make sure that they had understood, as Giancarlo mentioned, all the instructions and the task that they had to do. So that reminds me that there are a couple of students in this program, who are researching about the use of Spanish in bilingual schools. They are trying to find out when the students in a specific course use it, and if the reasons why they use it, and they are trying to compare those students with a different group, or a group that is a group of other students who don't use the L1 to communicate, to find out if the use of L1 helps them to learn better. If the use of Spanish in that context actually help the students to learn. So again, the idea of asking you to read that research was to have you read an example on how you can use the knowledge of these concepts that we have studied in social linguistics in a context similar to the ones that we have. So EFL classes, and to find out in this case why students code switch and the influence that it has in their learning of English. Okay, so let's continue with the topic of the readings that you had last week. As Noemi mentioned, multilingualism is when we have a context where different languages are spoken, and some people like may be part of that interaction, so they can usually use the same code. The reading mentioned also that that multilingualism sometimes is not seen as something positive because of the image or of the ideology that the group of people can have about the other language. So it mentioned an example of indigenous people who spoke their language, their native language, but also Spanish in Mexico. Those people didn't say that they were able to talk another different language because that indigenous language didn't have a good, let's say, it was not valued the same. It was not considered like interesting for the people who spoke Spanish. So that's why these children didn't say they were able to speak the indigenous language. Okay, the reading was also about the ideologies surrounding multilingualism. Do you remember any of those ideologies?
I don't know. I'm not sure about it, but I think that ideologies refers to the variety between persons that are talking. Like, well, some people speak better than others according to their features. For example, the culture, the education, the place that they live, or their attitudes.
Attitudes? Okay, but let's
Yeah.
think about our context, Liliana. In Colombia, if we know what have you heard about people who can speak more than one language besides Spanish, which is the native one? What is the ideology of some people about others who can speak more than one language?
You can speak more than.
Yes, in our country, when you know that a person can speak more than one language, so speak Spanish, but also speaks other language. What is the ideology about that person?
Well, we think that they have more education than the others.
Okay, what if
They
the language is an indigenous language?
Teacher, I think that ideologies are connected with the context of the person. For saying something in the image that we are watching there, we see the same person, but in her different roles, in her context that is a kind of different culture that we are involved to. And for me, just one simple example that we saw every day is the the Guambianos culture. They speak their mother tongue language, and also they can speak Spanish, and some of them also speak English. So the ideologies that surround the multilingualists are connected with the context for me.
Okay, but what is the thoughts about that person? Are they positive or negative about the skill that they have acquired of
Sometimes
speaking?
I think I might have an answer for that.
I think sometimes have both sides, because a person who can speak more than one language most of the people say, oh, you're like a know-it-all person, or you have studied too much, or you are involved in different contexts, not only about your culture, it's about an academic stuff and all that things. But also we have the wrong side of the coin, because some person put your finger on your back, just saying that you are know-it-all person, and reflect another kind of social issues about it.
Okay, so it varies, right? Giancarlo,
Yeah.
do you have an opinion to share with us?
Yes, I was actually going to say that those situations happens when there are two languages in which one language is seen as a, like, there are two varieties of the same languages, or two different codes, and one variety is seen as like the high variety, and the second language is seen as the low variety. And the ideology behind that is that they attribute to the high variety of language like some ideology is that are related to, like, prestigious, like the language is better, the language sounds best, the language is more used in circumstances that are connected with high status in the society. So people who are multilingual, in those cases, they tend to, like, deny the fact that they speak the low variety of the language, because they want to get the ideology or the identity of those who speak the high variety. And it happens a lot in the United States, for example, when you're Mexican descendant and then you speak English and Spanish. When you're with your American friends, you don't want to speak Spanish a lot because they will point you out, like, oh, you're Latino, you're like an immigrant, and you don't get the status. So those children who live in that multilingual situation, they tend to deny the fact that they speak Spanish, because they don't want to, or they think that speaking Spanish is associated with an ideology for people who has a lower status in the society. So that's what the ideology behind multilingualism is about.
Okay, very good, Giancarlo. Anybody else has an opinion about this? Um, okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. Does anybody else have an opinion about this? So as Giancarlo mentioned, for some people, there are they judge a language as having a high standard or a low position, and therefore they judge the people who speak those languages as either immigrants or people who are well educated and can speak more than one language. So it depends on the judgment that a group of people can make about or regarding the language, either it is English, Spanish, French, or an indigenous one. So those are the ideologies that are related with the ideas of multilingualism.
Teacher, I think, like I said, in person, and like you wrote that the person travel to another speaker language country, for saying, in my case, with my family in Canada, they just didn't know how to express themselves in English. Getting involved in that context and sharing and making another kind of activities, they appropriate the language. But in other community, my mother has to involve in a French language staff. So she has to figure how to speak using English and French and try to assimilate, for saying something, those kind of words in Spanish, because there were some words that she didn't understand. In French, try to make kind of translation in English, so in English she can figure the meaning of the sentence.
Okay.
And I think sometimes that happens to us. We are only speak English, and we use Spanish to figure or to try to understand the meaning of the sentence or uh, the expression that we use. But for same, in my case with my students, they are involved in a bilingual school. So most of them, the new ones, try to figure their expressions in that way. And it's about a position in our content, because they are trying to adopt and get involved in that context.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
Okay.
Liliana wrote that language ideologies are related to a language inferiority or respect towards others regarding if the person speaks one or two languages. So as we mentioned, it depends on the interactions thoughts about the second language. So if they think that speaking an indigenous language is also it's also difficult and it requires a lot of effort besides talking in Spanish. So they have their ideology about that indigenous language will be positive. While for other person, speaking or listening to somebody speaking an indigenous language won't be that important, and because the relation that person probably makes about the connection that person makes with that language is not a positive, but the opposite. Okay, the reading also had talked about stereotypes. How are languages stereotyped? Do you remember something about it? For instance, what you see on the screen is it's an ad that mixed two languages, right? So when a native person listens to somebody else, an immigrant, for example, code switching, they use pejorative words to refer to that use of the language. So, do you remember what are some of the words that had been created when people code switch? Those words that are pejorative?
Teacher, this is kind of relation between the way we figure the meaning of of that expression in this case about the Dr. Pepper Coke, because I see that kind of language in the way for saying something is, and is my my example, when a child is starting to read and he saw the banner of Olímpica for saying something, he related that Olímpica is a supermarket and we can buy groceries there, but he can read the word Olímpica. He just associate the word in his mind with the language that he can use, and the meaning is that Olímpica is a supermarket store.
Okay, but when we talk about stereotypes, we need to think about general ideas that people have regarding a second language in a place. For example, they really had they really mentioned the use of Turkish in Germany, in Berlin actually, and the use of English in Berlin. So both languages had a different stereotype. Same happens when, for example, a Spanish speaker is in the USA and code switches or makes up words, creates words because the person doesn't know enough vocabulary. So there are some words that are used to stereotype languages and to refer to those cases when people code switch uh, in the cases that they don't know the vocabulary they need.
So, teacher, we can say then that for saying something, this person who go to the United States said that the only thing he ate was chicken because that was the only word he knows how to say and interpret.
Okay, could be a case. And when the person code switches, the others can say that he's speaking Spanish, for example, and that is a pejorative word to mention to stereotype or to talk about that situation.
No, I got the point. Yeah.
So sometimes the stereotypes are also related to the idea of the use of one language. For example, no, in the case of the use of Turkish in Berlin, the stereotype is that it is used only in some areas where people who are from Turkey live, or it is used for selling things that not for, let's say, more formal activities like a discourse or let's say politics meetings or other more formal situations. So a language, a second language can be a stereotype and say that it is used for informal things. Or we can sometimes listen that uh, people speak Frañol to refer to people who make up words, create words when they are speaking French, and they are Spanish speakers, or they speak Spanish, or they speak Franglais to refer to people who are French and try to speak English, but they don't have a good level of English, and they start mixing the words. What about a shift and maintenance? What's that? When we talk about language shift and language maintenance.
teacher, I think, answered that question. I think that language maintenance is about practice the knowledge that I have about it. And about language switch is making reference about, like the picture said, that she's a Spanish speaker, and when another person speaks to her in broken Spanish, she continues speaking English because she needs to practice and maintain the level of language, of use of language.
Mm, more or less. Does anybody remember the idea of language shift and language maintenance? So the picture is about a woman from Puerto Rico. You know, Puerto Rico was conquered or is part of USA, is a colony. So, what is the language that is spoken there?
You know, the different language have quite different functions. And for example, one language is used in one set of circumstance, and the other in an entirely different set, and such difference is felt to be normal and proper.
Okay, that is more related to dysglossia.
Yes.
Teacher, language shift could be when we are speaking in another country or another people, and there is a flash in change. For instance, I am speaking in English, but I run into with one people that speak in Spanish, so it's like a code switch, could be
Now,
language shift.
that is code switching. That language shift in maintenance is related to the context where one country colonized the other.
Ah, okay.
So what happens there in those cases?
Teacher, maybe is when, I don't know, when they have the language shift, maybe it happens when, for example, some people are sharing in a native language, and maybe they have to abandon it to speak another language in this moment. I don't know if maybe
It is more related to that, exactly. So when they had their native language, but they decide to shift to the language of the country that colonized them, so they start actually using the other language, in this case English, in Puerto Rico.
But they maintain the mother language.
And the opposite is when there is language maintenance, when despite the fact that they were colonized by a country where a different language is spoken, they don't start using that language, but their native one.
A good example for that could be Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, it was part of the UK, and the UK, you know, tried so hard to have them to speak English for a certain period of time, but they maintain the you know the original Chinese language. I just don't remember. I think it's a different variation from Mandarin. And after some years, when they declared independence, they decided to keep English even though they never left their original tongue. And the case in Puerto Rico was that there was actual language maintenance there because they, even though the United States tried for several years to, you know, force them to speak English in school, they decided to keep the original language because in Puerto Rico everybody speaks Spanish in their family homes and like most of the like everyday and regular context. So language maintenance could be the phenomena when there is a second language that comes to a country due to a colony process and people decide to maintain language even though they're forced to speak a second one.
Okay, good examples. Thank you, Giancarlo. All right, here we have competence and convergence in multilingual societies. So when we talk about the competences, we need to think about how well people can speak both languages. And well, there is no like a rule because the level of proficiency in both languages can differ and the uses can also be different. So what theory says is that it is not always like equal. That cases in which a person can speak both languages with the same proficiency is not common. Then we have the idea of diglossia, which is what most of you already mentioned, that the idea of high or lower ideology regarding a language. Right, so one language can can be considered more important than the other. It can have can be used for formal situations and can have the level of prestigious and have is powerful, while the other one is the opposite, has less prestige and less power, as in the case that Giancarlo just mentioned. In Puerto Rico, for example. So for some situations, people speak English, and for others, they speak Spanish. So Spanish is used at home, and they kept the language, but they use it for informal situations, while they use English for more formal contexts. The reading also mentions the case of Haitians who speak Creole, Haitian Creole at home, but they speak a variety of French in other situations. Okay, here we have a cartoon that represents a little bit what happens when we code switch. We can code switch in the same sentence, or we can code switch in different sentences, or we can code switch in different topics during a conversation. In this case, the code switch is done in the same sentence in different conversations, but it's in the same sentence. I think, as we discussed code switching at the beginning of the encounter, I think it is a concept that is clear for you, for all of you. But well, let me know if you have questions about this. Sandra wrote the language use change according to the situations in which the speakers are. Well, we can code switch because of different reasons. We mentioned at the beginning of the encounter a research article in which the researchers found out that students code switch because they needed to make sure that they had understood the instructions and they had understood the task, and actually it helped them to learn English. So in that context, those students were code switching in an English lesson with that purpose. In other situations, code switching can have a different function. So we could probably find out that students code switch because they want to find out the teacher's reactions towards breaking the law of speaking only English in the classroom. It can be a case. People can code switch to prevent from others close to them to understand what they are talking about. People can code switch because they don't get enough language to express their ideas in the second language. So there are different reasons why that can happen. Is there any question about code switching or any of the concepts that we have reviewed? Or comments?
There is a current trend nowadays that we can find, especially millennials, as they approach to learning English, they tend to code switch, but I think that is a conscious behavior on them. It happens to me in some of my classrooms that my students, they want to get the identity of an English speaker quickly, and even though they're in the beginner level, they want to code switch just to let them know, I mean, other people who's not even English student, that they're using the English language. So that's something that I just wanted to share as like an anecdote to this code switching phenomenon.
That can happen. I mean, code switching in that case is connected to the ideas of ideologies of speakers of a second language in the context that you just mentioned. So if that interferes or is affecting the environment of the classroom, or if it's affecting students' learning of the language, or for example, in those cases, it could be a good idea to research about it, to find out if really they do it in a conscious way with the purpose of letting others know they can actually speak a second language because they think that is positive to show that they have the knowledge. It could be also interesting to find out if bilingual students' ideologies about language is very different to students who don't study in a bilingual school.
Yeah, and one thing that I discovered, I had the opportunity to teach some courses for the Cursos Libres at the Universidad Atlántico here in Barranquilla, and I found out the higher level students, they they tended to use language in public context, you know, like out of the class. When they got out of the class, they went out like for the bus station, and they were like talking in English in the bus station. Sometimes I was at the bus station as well, like for some reason, and I tend to listen to that. But bilingual school students from a school that I worked for a few years ago, they didn't use English. As soon as they got out of the school, they were using English all the time in the school. But as soon as they got out of the school, you would listen from them more Spanish, and they wouldn't show that they were like bilingual. So that was, I always wanted to know why that happened.
Mhm. So it could be a good research topic. It is related to linguistics, and it would be good to find out the reason why that happens in those contexts. Good. Any comment about the topic? Questions?
I think that was really interesting. When I talk or when I read about the disclosure and the two forms that you can distinguish the code, in that case with the high variety and the low variety, that was new for me. And I don't know if it's correct, but I could understand that the high variety is more using when it's in a public language. Yes, maybe I don't know, in a ceremony, or maybe in a bank. I don't know. And maybe the low variety is more used in a home, or maybe when you speak with your family, with your friends.
Exactly. In more informal situations, and that is the example, or that is related to the example that Giancarlo gave us about Puerto Rico. Good. Did you guys start reading the articles assigned for this week? Do you guys have questions about them? Remember that they are about neurolinguistics, neuroeducation, which is the second part of the course, because applied linguistics is applied linguistics 2 is divided into social linguistics and neurolinguistics. That's why you have those readings.
Well, teacher, I think of a part of the reading make reference about the physical or issues of the brain that are involved in learning process. And the other is how we associate this physical function, not only that involves learning and teaching process, is more related with the whole stuff in our classrooms.
But the idea with neuroscience, I mean, doctors that study the brain use those brain scanners and use those images to find out what are the parts of the brain that get active when when people study, or when people memorize information, or when people remember information. And the idea is that that knowledge about the study of the brain can help teachers to find out how to help the students learn, in our case, a new language. So what they have done are studies, experiments using those scanners, using those images, to find out what are the connections that the brain makes when people try to learn something, when they try to pay attention, when they memorize information, when they retrieve information. And that's why neuroscience is also helping other fields, not only linguistics, but also other fields like, for example, um, the ones that take into account behavior, so psychology, to find out how people learn about ethics and moral, what parts of the brain are activated when a person is faced with a moral or ethics situation. And well, the idea of neuroscience is that with those studies of the brain, made with those scanners and those images, we can understand better how people or we all connect information, how we retrieve it, how we store it, how we learn.
Teacher, I understand that in neuroscience, they make quite research and studies with specific machines and tests about how a person reacts when they have different sensations about specific topics, like you were saying. Is quite different to learn and to react to the learning process of ethics, and it's quite different from math. And for me, it depends of the feeling and the aims that you have with those kind of learning process, because they're different and they are teach in different ways. So the human brain reacts in different ways
Exactly.
of each process. Because if for saying something, this person likes to read a lot, so ethics and values is going to have a high level reaction from the one that he's going to expose with maths for saying something.
You got the point, Sharon. What you will find in the readings is that all the information that gets to our brain gets there through perceptions or sensations, or our eyes, our ears, uh, our taste, or because we smell it. So all the information that we get goes through or gets there through emotions, and then it is classified as good or bad. And then
But
according to that,
also this is related with multiple intelligence.
yes, it is. Because it also reinforces the idea that people learn in different ways. That's why when the students have more chance to make decisions about how they are going to learn something, chances are higher that they actually learn, because it's not the way the teacher imposes it, but it's the way that the student decide because of of the way his brain classified it as good or bad, or something he likes or doesn't like.
And teacher, and these issues that you are saying are the ones that I'm going to put in practice in the neuroeducation.
Exactly.
So based on the stories and the reactions of the person, I'm going to open their minds through activities and in the neuroeducation.
That's the idea, to find out how the brain works and use that information to try to use it in teaching and learning. If we know how the brain works, then we would use the best methods or approaches to teach and learn.
Okay, it's about to open possibilities to give the student tools and resources to learn.
And to understand, we need to understand because we teach, so we need to understand how people learn or brain works. So you will find out that children have stages in which they learn some things, and that actually is the time when they have that opportunity open or available, and then that opportunity is not available anymore. You will find out a case or information about developing their visual skills, and that happens when the baby is 8 to 11 years old, to 11 months old, sorry, from 8 to 11 months old. So if children do not have visual, do not use their vision or their eyes at that age, they are going to have difficulties later on, not only regarding their vision, but also their cognition, the way they learn. So those studies let us know when it is better to teach something, taking into account people's ages, or how we can make something interesting for students based on the research about how brains react to something that is good for people. How can we make that something could be good for learners so that they are interested in actually, they actually pay attention and they actually learn. As Sandra wrote, it is important to perform activities that awaken emotion, attention, and develop memory. That is very important, or that is what research on neuroscience have shown, have revealed. Okay, great. So we will discuss more about that topic in the next encounter. I'm going to stop this encounter now, so we have 10 minutes before we start the second one, those of you who have teaching practicum too. I appreciate your comments and your participation, and we'll meet for this encounter next Wednesday. Thank you guys, and we'll talk later.